And we're back. We did it again.
You're in Bendigo today, mate.
Yeah, just up visiting you in the hometown.
Humble old Bendigo, just north of Melbourne. And we're lucky enough to be at my folks' place for the day.
Yep.
And we thought we'd
set up hospitality.
We thought we'd set up a little recording session here while we're at it.
That's it. So today we're talking about an episode of the Knowledge Podcast, which is the podcast that Farnham Street put out, and it's with Adam Robinson. Why did we choose this?
This episode was split into two parts. I was initially listening to it and sparked my curiosity in a big way. And I said, hey, Lockie, you need to check this out. And
I usually listen to your recommendations, so I jumped in on it straight away almost.
And you were almost straight away going to shut the iPhone down and stop listening and then delete my phone number off your phone.
That's it. So it was not as clear cut for me that this was enjoyable, but I did end up enjoying it quite a lot. But regardless, we've had a few interesting conversations about it. So
yeah, and I think we're on the same page. I think we both had hype about the same things, and I think we both had some reservations about some others. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about Adam?
Yeah, so very brief bio on Adam is he's was born in New York City in 1955, but he grew up sort of outside of Illinois, which is just outside of Evanston, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. And he became a chess master. He started playing when he was like 12 and became a rated chess master, and was actually mentored by Bobby Fischer, who's a famous chess player. So he's a pretty smart fella.
How did he start out playing chess though?
Well, he started out he was playing with a kid at his school, and the kid beat him every time. And he was like, well, that's not going to stand. So he went home and studied every game that over the course of a year that Bobby Fischer had basically ever done, and started obviously beating the other kid. So he's got a fair bit of brain power, this fella. And he went on to study at Oxford and Wharton and all those fancy schools. And studied jurisprudence.
A lawyer,
which I didn't know until you told me that. Can't they just say lawyer? Law?
There's different. I think there's different sittings depending on schools and things.
Okay.
And there's Juris Doctor, jurisprudence.
Right.
I don't know what differentiates them. They're lawyers.
Yep. Good on them. And when he left uni, he started tutoring people, and that's where he started the Princeton Review with one other, and it was a company that helped people beat the SAT, which is like the enter score or the entry test that ranks students, and then they get into college from their results, I believe.
And this started out as a little money-making idea for him, just in his studying days, or just out of school? Just out of school.
So he started just by tutoring one person and found that he had a knack of it, and he had a pretty interesting way of thinking about it. And so this became quite a big company that he sold, and it really helped students get a lot better at beating this test. And essentially now he is a advisor to large hedge funds and other investors about kind of macroeconomic trends. And he sort of first came to maybe more of a public consciousness in kind of this speaking engagements and things like that when he was on Tim Ferriss's podcast in 2016, 2017. So he's kind of like a really analytical, switched on guy who thinks a lot about games and macroeconomics.
And I think it might be worthwhile noting that whilst he's on the macro trends, he looks at it from a micro level is what I drew from from the podcast.
Yeah.
And that was the investment section of what he spoke about, because he certainly wouldn't want to call himself an economist, but we'll get to that. So why did you disagree with me so much to begin with? This was the start of the podcast, Lockie.
Yeah, so the podcast kind of talks about, I guess he starts in a way I didn't expect. I kind of expected him to talk more around investment or something along those lines, but he starts by talking about this new book he's writing, The Great Game, which is a work of fiction, but it's sort of a teaching book about how to be happy, from what I can understand, or at least around those themes of happiness.
How to live the game of life.
And I think it's just the way he was speaking about it that kind of bugged me and really put me off, and my radar was up saying, let's get the hell out of here. I was like, should I spend the rest of the time? What's wrong with Ryan? Why is he listening to this?
So which I think we were actually in agreement about, is I thought that there was a degree of certainty and almost, I'm hesitant to say it, but arrogance that went with some of those thoughts around how to live a good life, particularly coming off the back of where those initial thoughts had come from. I guess I was a little bit skeptical because he was basically asked a question out of the blue on stage in an interview with Tim Ferriss as to what his New Year's resolutions were coming off the previous year, and basically after a little back and forth in his own mind, he was able to come up with 3 different learnings that he'd had from the previous year, which were the importance of connecting with others, the importance of making fun and delight in any situation, and leaning into each moment expecting magic or miracles to happen. Now, it's not to pull away necessarily from those points, but I think for them to be almost aha light bulb moments on stage in front of a lot of people after what sounded like he kind of fell into answering the question in a way that he wasn't expecting. He actually said that he said that there were 3 things he'd reflected on, but he hadn't actually reflected on the year at all, which he was honest about. And it just didn't, maybe there was like a disingenuous element to it.
Yeah, like
maybe.
He goes on to sort of talk about how statistically we're better off than we've ever been financially and quality of life than, say, compared to, I think Shane kind of points out, compared to, say, past centuries or this sort of thing. But, suicide rates are at an all-time high and this sort of thing, which again is kind of like a really high-level view in my opinion. And then the conclusion drawn is that people are unhappy and money's not the issue, which I'm not sure you can just generalize like that to everyone. And it just gave me the overall feel that he was kind of approaching it from, I've been really financially successful and I'm really smart, which of course he is, and I loved the bit on investment and that sort of thing. And I'm a pretty happy guy, so I can solve this issue. It came from this sort of intellectualizing, in a field that really he doesn't really, like, he can have a personal opinion about it, of course, and he's lived a life, but to me it was really, I'm not sure that's the type of person I really want to be listening to for advice on happiness. And this is something that I thought would be interesting to talk about because, you're kind of drawn to people, at least I am, and Warren Buffett may be a good example of this, is like, this guy's super successful. He seems like a really good guy. He's wonderful speaker and he's got that sort of folksy nature about him. And, his book that was written about him, Snowball's probably my favourite book, but people go to these Berkshire Hathaway meetings and ask him all about all these life and philosophical questions, which he answers. But because he's good at picking stocks, is that a good reason to ask him about all your other troubles? And then I think that people sometimes get sucked into answering these things as these successful figures where they really, they don't know that much more about it than the next person on the street. I reckon.
Yeah. Almost as if you've had some success in this part of your life, therefore you must have the whole of it worked out.
Yeah, you're just like this sage.
I think the coming back to that these are the three ways that you need to live your life, and I think what I felt is there was some certainty around that it was, if it's not this way, then that isn't the way you should be.
Yeah, it's like his hacked happiness or something like that.
Yeah.
The certainty element was off-putting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a very much a make your own, discover your own type thing, if anything.
Yeah, like it would have been different if he's kind of like, hey, this is what's worked for me. I've had some success and I feel like I've been able to live a happy life, and I'm not sure about your circumstance, but here's what's worked for me and I hope you find it useful. Whereas it's more like, I've looked at these data points and obviously money's not a problem, which obviously it is for a lot of people. And the comparison, but okay, we're living better than we were now than Louis XV's France or whatever. But it's about hope and opportunity. I'm sure those things come into it. It just seems like I don't know the answer, obviously. I have no idea, but it seems like it's a bit more complicated than that, and it's not something you can necessarily straight up intellectualize in that way, I don't think. But
maybe drawing some too big a confident conclusions from some data points.
Yeah. But
sounds like something he would definitely not do in the investing space.
Probably not. So on the investment, this is where it starts to get a bit more enjoyable. He's a very clever man.
Certainly. He covers off two things that really, really resonated for me, going through the different types of traders and also different types of trends and the way that he looks at it. But what was so interesting for me was, certainly not an expert or certainly not anyone that's done a great deal of reading in the space, hearing about the way he approaches what he does. Now, obvious big disclaimer for anything that we talk about here is none of this is financial advice. And we don't claim to be providing any financial advice.
This is probably the last place you should be looking for that. Consult other sources.
But nonetheless.
Yes.
It's
something we're interested in though.
Yes. I think strangely interested in, would you say?
Yes, I would.
And I feel like that many people are in this bracket.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the thing I was struck with listening to this, because he goes through his approach, which is pretty interesting actually. One of the things he says is if you want to find gold or go and look for gold, look where things don't make sense and dig in further from there. That's an awesome quote, isn't it? It's kind of like if something kind of doesn't work with how you know the world to work, there's probably something that's misaligned there or mispriced or something like that. And that's an interesting quote that I'll take away, I reckon.
Yeah, he certainly looks at it from the perspective of what are particular people doing, and based on what those particular people are doing, how should I act in this environment? So he's, rather than picking stock or focusing on a currency or bonds on a particular country or something of that nature.
The intrinsic value of BHP or something.
Yes.
He doesn't care about that. He's focusing on the humans that are buying these things, which determine the price.
Yeah. And he's got a great view of what investment is as a result. And he says that an investment is nothing more than the expression of a view of the future. Your view of the future can be right or wrong, and your means of expression can be right or wrong. But that's what you're attempting to do, which is excellent.
Yeah. And he talks about trends too, which is kind of that bit I found particularly interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. He so obviously in operating in the space that he is, which is what are people doing, you know, and how are people thinking, and, you know, particular groups of people. Now, bearing in mind that he's dealing with groups of people that are predominantly made up of big investors and people who are professionals in this space. But what he's looking at is over the course of his years in the game, you know, decades, he's said that there's 3 ways that a trend can start. He did say, you know, in the financial markets, but he said he would suggest it's broadly applicable. So the first being like this air pocket method, to steal his words for it. Basically, where there's a price will be going up. Now, this isn't like hyperbolically going up. This is just trending,
steady.
Yeah, not to steal the word, trending upwards. And then there's a particular point where there'll be a dip, and he describes that as this is a dip that occurs across the space of some months to, you know, that eventually will bounce back from there. And he says what happens at that point in time is there's a particular group of investors that think that are looking a little bit longer, so they pull out their shares and want to short the particular stock. They eventually make some big returns on that.
Is that the smart money getting out? Is that what it is?
Yeah, he says the smart money getting out, but the smart money also shorting what is going on that particular stock, and then, or that particular investment. And then eventually it does bounce back. Eventually it does surpass, but in the time, the smart money, if you will, has made their money, and they've exited as well. So almost sounds like a win-win from what I took away from it, but a trend nonetheless. The other was there's this parabolic method where something is rising so fast that it can't possibly keep going up at that rate. And so what quite often happens is there's a drop that'll occur at some point in time after that. And then the third being where nothing looks like it has been going on. And this one here was the most, I think, interesting to me, because he spoke about how when there appears like there's nothing going on in particular circumstances, that all that's happening is the shorter game, or shorter sighted or less confident investors are just their stocks or their investments are changing hands with those with a little bit more long-sightedness or want to stick around for a longer time. And so it provides more reassurance. So across the space of months and years, as a stock is sitting fairly plateaued, it's dotting backwards and forwards, his expectation that is in itself a trend for an upward shift that's going to occur at some stage afterwards. It should be noted that he believed that trend 1 and 2 can also be flipped in terms of not just an upward, but also on the downward.
See, and this is it's super interesting to hear about those sort of things. And it's really I've always been really interested in investment advice, but it's not, I've kind of come to realize why is that? Because it's not actually that useful to me. I'm not going to go out, or I shouldn't, tomorrow and use those 3 trends to try and start mapping Commonwealth Bank stocks or something. But it seems to be you're hearing the secrets to making getting rich or something. But
Well, why?
if you actually let's go back to Warren Buffett. This guy's picked the market for 50 years or something. He's one of the richest people in the world. But there's only a handful of people that have been able to perform like that. And they're like rock stars of the business world. And they do that professionally, and only they are the ones that have just outperformed the market. So it's bloody hard. And most of the guys who try and do it, they don't do it well. It's been proven basically that it's no better than chance investing in most people.
I think this is attributable. It might be to his business partner Charlie Munger, where basically he says, unless you are doing this as a professional in some caliber, just buy some indices and forget about them.
Yeah, hit up the index funds and go do something else but it's just so interesting to read about and getting that edge and that sort of thing. But to me,
it's attractive.
It is. And look, I've invested and done terribly. So I invested some money in the stock market just before the 2008 crash.
Nicely timed, mate.
Halved the money and walked away as a uni student crying, basically. Managed to sell basically at the bottom too, which is good. And that's been most of my experience. I've been tempted to dabble back in, but I'm always interested in reading about investment advice, and I've kind of had to stop myself because I've realised that I have had much more success in other things that I've made money from. So I should be focusing on that. Unless I can apply it kind of in a micro sense, I should just be letting someone else deal with that. There is one book I have liked called Mastering the Market Cycle by Howard Marks. And
I haven't read that.
Yeah, I'd love to do it on the podcast one day because to me it's the only one that's really been able to combine, say, the thinking of Daniel Kahneman, how you're feeling when the different parts of a market cycle are happening, why most people know you should sell at the bottom but don't, and all this sort of, buy at the bottom but don't, and all these sort of things. And I actually read that book while I was going through the Bitcoin bubble, having bought some Bitcoin.
And you watched yourself, did you?
I watched myself react and others around me and all the emotions that went with the small investment I made in some Bitcoin. And so that book had taught me a few things. But knowing the PE multiple to sell at, or, why am I reading that stuff? I should be doing other things.
Yeah, there's probably, unless you're truly investing the time, you're going to struggle. And so it's let someone else handle that for you that's invested, or let something that tracks the market, not even someone, so you're paying lower fees, do it for you. That's
my opinion, unless you've got an edge or a real passion for it. Yeah.
He says, Adam does say, I quite enjoyed this. He said, I think there's a book called One Up on Wall Street, and he said he loves when books like this come out, or he actually hates when books like this come out, because what it means is there's a number of people in the general public who get excited about investing, think that they've got one up on Wall Street, and will go out and start trying these things. And so this book was centered around, the local information that you have and things that you're exposed to, so you should invest based on that. Whereas the guys on Wall Street love that. They love these moments because that is their opportunity to take your lunch money and pocket it for themselves,
and then lose it all in the next crash.
Yeah, you wouldn't jump into the ring with Muhammad Ali. So why would you jump into the bloody ocean with these sharks?
God knows. So he spent a lot of his life learning how to beat, or I suppose, win games. One of the things he put his mind to, as mentioned earlier, was cracking the SAT. And how he approached this was really interesting to learn, because he essentially took I'm pretty sure he would have thought of our saying at the time, would you think, right? About thinking about the box, not thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Coined here. And he...
I think it was phrased slightly differently.
But he basically took the test and sort of broke it down and said, okay, how's this written? Well, there's, say, an example is all the hard questions at the bottom and then multiple choice. Well, there's a couple of answers that are generally like definitely not right. And then there's two of these, C and D, actually it'll be one of those two answers. I'm tempted to pick C because rationally it works out, but I know it's a hard question at the bottom, so it's trying to trick me. So I've actually picked the one that I don't think's right out of those two. I'll pick D, and that's the right answer. And this sort of thinking about the construct of the test itself, he did that in many different ways and helped a lot of people get really good scores.
He did, well, so much so that SATs had to be overhauled time and time again, and now it's a much tougher thing to crack. But there's still things that you can do to kind of level yourself up in that game. And he talks about this quite a lot in this section of the podcast around learning, and how he says, you're not going to go back and look at all your notes from the last semester and all your highlights. That is not an effective way to go really well in your exam. In order to go well on your exam, you need to rehearse your exam. So he believes that rehearsing the entire and then rehearsing the subcomponents.
Yeah, which matches what we've read elsewhere, learn by doing, Get the feeling of doing something while also learning academically, I guess, is probably a way to describe it, by reading or learning how other people do it, but do it at the same time. Bit like what I described with my Bitcoin adventure.
You learn a lot.
Yeah, because I could feel the feeling of, riding a bubble. And he seems to think the same way, is that you need to test under different conditions that you'll practice under different conditions that you'll likely encounter in the actual game.
Yeah, well, reading your highlights is only going to make you good at reading and highlighting things. It's not actually going to help you crack the SAT and the mark that you need. And I was going to ask, mate, but then how does this apply to, more real life examples? And what I mean is not in a test environment, but more outside into the world.
My takeaways on that are that his message was kind of, even in the more less gamified versions or controlled environments, is that you want to be trying to break things down into its component parts and make sure you can measure something to do with them so that you actually know if you're getting better and get a baseline of where you're at. That to me made quite a lot of sense. Not always as easy, but at least approximation of some sort in that sense would be better than nothing. And then practice in the real life environments and reflect on it.
Well, in the softer skills of the business environment, because obviously in the technical space, you're going to have more quantifiable feedback. But, in the soft skills, it's all about feedback, and trying to gather candid, transparent feedback on how you're going from different sources, and then using that to help gauge yourself and move forward.
Which is not easy, and you got to make time for it, which is something that I struggle with, is making the time and the effort to put something in place where you can actually do that. Because a lot of time goes by without me actually doing so. Something I'm trying to get better at this year. What are you going to take away to do differently from this, mate?
I think it's what I just touched on then is part of it. So but in a broader sense, it's not just the seeking of the feedback, but it's actually the measuring and then being cognizant of if things are improving, if they're not improving over time.
It's been a theme over a couple of episodes, that takeaway, I think.
Yes.
It's pretty important.
Yes. And the other one.
It's not something many people do either. So if you did it, you would be getting ahead relative to others, I think.
Yeah. There's definitely something that's interlinked there with the kind of principles approach, systems approach, and then the measuring that happens with it, you know. You know, you can't improve what isn't measured.
Try new things and actually do things.
Yeah. And the other one for me, mate, is whilst being a critical skeptic, is I do want to have a little bit more of a look at some of the investing space and just have a play around, do the doing.
Do it. It'll be a wild adventure. Hopefully you do better than I have.
It's going to be little small losses, I think, along the way.
Yeah. For me, it's making sure I'm really thinking about who's giving me this advice and what are they actually good at. Is it something I can take away myself? Going back to the first part of the podcast. But then it's probably continuing to learn by doing. I want to keep that up and find more ways to measure the subcomponent parts of my job or whatever I'm trying to achieve.
I think something we drew on from range was it's almost that energy and effort exertion that you have in those moments as being one of your feedbacks.
Yeah.
If I'm exerting energy here, that might be, you know, enough. If I haven't got others, so I'm struggling. I'm doing good work. Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
This has been a nice little short one.
Yeah.
And hopefully the next one will be another long one.
Something a bit different. See you next time.
Thank you.